Good morning. My name is Steve Giddins. I am a FIDE master and chess author from England. And on this short video this morning I'm going to show you a highly amusing little game which was played a couple of months ago in the Open tournament in Bad Wiessee in Bavaria. And it was played between a young German player called Christoph Rammer and a Dutch IM who's a very good friend of mine, Gerard Welling. My apologies to any Dutch listeners to this video for my dreadful pronunciation of Gerard's name. But Gerard is a very, very interesting and creative player who's a great connoisseur of offbeat openings. And he has a greater knowledge and interest in offbeat and unusual openings than any other chess player I've ever met. He has an absolutely vast knowledge of all manner of obscure systems and ideas and who's played them and what their ideas were and this, that and the other. And he's played all manner of interesting stuff. And what made this game so funny was that his opponent apparently tried to surprise him by playing an unusual opening against him. The whole idea of doing that is quite amusing in itself. I mean, trying to surprise Gerard Welling with an offbeat opening is a bit like trying to shock Gordon Ramsay by swearing. And unfortunately in this game Christoph Rammer came terribly unstuck. He'd apparently prepared quite hard for the game with an international master friend of his, and they decided to surprise Gerard with the move 1b4, the so-called Sokolsky or orangutan opening. But as I say, Gerard's got ideas in almost any system you care to name, and after a few minutes' thought he produced the outlandish reply knight a6. Now at first sight it might look as though this is completely absurd and black is just deliberately trying to play the most ridiculous move he can think of, but this was far from the case, because in actual fact knight a6 is an idea of the German international master Stefan Bucher, who's another great connoisseur of unusual openings. He's also the editor of a very fine magazine called Kaisiba, which has a lot of analysis of offbeat opening lines. And Gerard and Stefan are very good friends and have frequently exchanged ideas and analysis. So Gerard was very familiar with the fact that Stefan Bucher had developed this idea. Unfortunately, Christoph Rammer, I'm fairly sure, had never seen this move in his life before and was completely on his own already. He played the most natural response, b5. It is possible to play a3 in this position, whereupon black will continue with c5. But instead, Rammer played the most natural move b5, chasing the knight, which went to c5, and then he chased it again. And now, Stefan Bucher's original idea had been to play knight e6 here. Typically outlandish idea of his. But in this game, Gerard played a slightly different treatment. He played the move knight e4, and even this was not by any means improvisation, because this whole variation had actually been explored back in the 1960s by another Dutch IM, a man called Dick van Heet, who was a very interesting and creative and really quite strong IM at that period. He played in the Viscount's tournament at least twice in the top group and beat some very fine players. So he's no he's no mug, and certainly his interesting ideas in openings are well worth looking at. And he'd played knight e4. Black is basically desperately trying to provoke white into chasing this knight all over the board and setting up a big pawn centre. Now in the game Rammer played the more restrained response here, e3, but it's also possible to play f3, which is perhaps the most obvious response. And this had actually been played in a game of Van Heet's back in the 60s, and he went knight e6, and after e4 he played e6, and then followed up with f5. And as we'll see, this is basically very similar to what happens in the present game. Rammer played the slightly more restrained move e3. Black played b6. And basically what black is going to do is put his bishop on the long diagonal and then play something like e6 and f5, with a kind of Dutch stroke Queen's Indian setup. So the game continued bishop d3, bishop b7, and now he chased the knight away with f3. Back it came, e4, e6, knight e2. Very harmonious, natural development by white. Can't be bad. Black continues f5, thematically attacking the white centre. And now the e4 pawn can't be maintained on that square, so white pushed on with e5. Knight came back to f7. Now, one thing white has to watch out for is the possibility of a queen check on h4, which could potentially cause a problem for the pawn on d4. So he has to watch that. But his position looks very solid and can't be bad by any means. He continued bishop e3, and now once again Herat produced a move which probably came as quite a surprise to his opponent, because rather than some kind of routine development, he hit him with g5, and this is preparing to soften up this long diagonal down with the white squared bishop on b7 by advancing the pawn onto g4, as well as just gaining space on the king side. So very typical hyper-modern type play, sort of thing one sees in the English defence, 1b6 for example, but still quite original and unusual play, and not the sort of thing that the average player runs into very often. And this game's a very good illustration of the shock value of such opening play, because Christoph Ramme is quite a promising young player. He's around, I believe he's around 2150 or something. So he's, by no means a fool, but he was just completely fazed by Black's play in this game, and very rapidly went wrong. He continued with knight d2, Black played knight e7, and now, unfortunately, Ramme lost his head a bit with the move h4, which is very typical of what can happen in these positions. White feels that he's got to punish Black for his outlandish play. And this looks like a way of doing it, because it appears to be provoking weaknesses on the king side. Black can't maintain his pawn phalanx by playing h6, because obviously h takes g and he can't recapture with the pawn. So it looks like white is forcing some kind of weakness on the black king side. But unfortunately, Ramme had forgotten John Nunn's first law of tactics, which states that loose bits drop off. And after the move gh4, he shouldn't recapture. He should actually acknowledge his mistake and play something else, but he followed up with a natural recapture on h4. But now white has two loose bits, basically, namely the rook on h4 and the bishop on e3. Black attacked them both with knight d5, and white, who had obviously seen this, defended them with the natural move bishop f2, and everything looks perfectly okay for white here. But in actual fact, his position is resignable after one more move. So perhaps you'd like to have a little think about what Black should play in this position. You can pause the video and have a more prolonged think if you'd like to do so. But there is a move now which basically ends the game immediately, which Herat Welling found, of course. So did you spot the idea? I'm afraid poor young Mr. Ramme got the shock of his life, because Black now played knight e3, an absolute bone cruncher, which decimates the white position at a stroke. The knight obviously is attacking the white queen and the pawn on g2. If the knight is taken, then after the bishop e3, Black simply takes on h4, winning a whole exchange, and that's the end of the game basically. That in fact is what happened. White struggled on for a few more moves but eventually lost. But there's absolutely nothing else he can do in this position, because if he moves his queen away to c1 for example, then Black simply takes on g2 check, and then next move he takes the rook on h4, winning the house. So after knight e3, White basically could resign at once. Now this caused quite a bit of amusement. I think there was quite a crowd around the board when this position appeared on the board. And one has to feel sorry for the white player, because it doesn't look as though White's done an awful lot wrong in this game really. Black's played this outlandish set of moves, with his knight being chased all over the board to f7 and then playing g5 and so on. And then all of a sudden white is completely and utterly lost. So I thought this was really very amusing, quite a striking illustration of how effective it can be to play such original openings as black, and also just amusing from the point of view of white setting out to surprise his opponent with an unusual opening and instead running into someone who not only knew about the move knight a6 but actually knew quite a lot about it, and was able to rattle out what one might consider a lot of theory. So very amusing, and perhaps a good illustration of the old English saying that if you sup with the devil you need a long spoon. And I guess in this game, unfortunately for Christoph Rammer, his spoon just wasn't quite long enough.